Dry grass brushed against the knees, and the air smelled of hot dust and crushed leaves. Somewhere beyond the trees, something moved through the brush with that low, papery hiss you only hear in places where shade is getting thinner every year. A small primate pauses at the edge of that world. Not a human, not yet anything you would name with confidence. The back lifts a little. The head rises. The eyes clear the grass for one extra second. That is all. No trumpet sound, no grand revelation, no flag planted in the earth. Just a body trying something costly in a place that is changing. And that is where the story of the origin of upright walking begins. Not with triumph, but with inconvenience. Because walking on two legs is, in many ways, a strange bargain. It gives you height. It may help over distance. It may free the hands. But it also comes with a price your own body still pays. The lower back that aches, the hips that strain, the fragile balance of a spine stacked almost upright over the ground. The unsettling part is this. We do not have a single clean answer for why that bargain was made. What we have are clues. A skull from about 7 million years ago, Sahelanthropus tchadensis, with a forward-set foramen magnum, hinting that the head may have balanced differently than before, just a whisper from bone. And if one opening at the base of a skull can hint at a whole new way of moving through the world, imagine what a trail of ancient footsteps might say. If you enjoy slow, deep history told this way, a like or subscribe helps more than you'd think. That whisper from bone matters because movement almost never survives. Muscle rots away. Tendons vanish. Skin is gone. Even the small habits of a body, the sway of the hips, the way weight rolls through the foot, the angle of a head while crossing open ground, disappear so completely that deep time usually leaves us with silence. If you want to understand the long walk upright, you have to read what little remains as if it were a damaged letter. That is why the clue in Sahelanthropus tchadensis is so unsettling. A forward-set foramen magnum is just an opening at the base of a skull. You could hold the idea in one hand. And yet that one detail suggests the head may have rested differently on the spine, not hanging out in front the way it does in a body built mainly for four-limbed travel, but balanced a little more above it, just a body beginning to negotiate with gravity in a new way. And that matters to you more than it first seems. When you stand still in a kitchen, or wait in a doorway, or feel your neck settle over your shoulders without thinking, you are using a solution so old it had to be guessed from the underside of a skull. But a skull can only hint. It can suggest posture, maybe habit, maybe a tendency. It cannot show a step landing. It cannot show a heel pressing into soft ground or toes pushing away. For that, the earth itself had to keep a record. And once, in a bed of ash, it did. And that record is stranger than a bone because it is behavior. Picture a sheet of volcanic ash after it has settled, still soft enough to take an impression, fine as powder, darkened by moisture. A body crosses it. Then another step. Then another. No one meant to leave a message there. No one knew the ground itself was briefly becoming a page. But around 3.6 million years ago, that is exactly what happened. The Laetoli footprints matter because they preserve something anatomy can only suggest. Not just a pelvis that might have worked a certain way, not just a skull opening that hints at posture, but a sequence. Weight comes down, the foot meets the ground in order. The trackway shows a being moving upright across ash. And suddenly the question changes. We are no longer asking only whether some early form could rise. We are asking how often, how well, how naturally it had already begun to do it. There is something almost intimate about that. You can study a bone and admire its shape, but a footprint feels closer to a person, even when the walker was not a person in the modern sense. A print is a moment of contact. It is pressure, balance, hesitation, or confidence, all pressed into earth for an instant before time hardens it. And if that affects you more than a skull does, that makes sense. Your own life is made of this same contact. Heel, weight, toes, again and again, floor after floor, year after year. But prints in ash can tell you only so much. To understand how that gait was held together, we need a body. And one small skeleton is waiting for us there. That body is Lucy. About 3.2 million years old, Australopithecus afarensis arrives as a shape, a small frame carrying one enormous implication. If the ash prints gave us motion pressed into earth, Lucy gives us the scaffolding that could hold that motion together. And once you look at that scaffolding, the old question changes again. Her pelvis matters first. It was bowl-shaped, not built like the long, narrow form you would expect in a creature relying mainly on four limbs. A shape like that helps support the trunk in a more upright posture. Then there is the femur, angled inward toward the knee. That detail sounds dry on paper, until you feel what it means. It brings the leg under the body, under the center of balance, where repeated steps on 2 feet become possible without collapsing into a side-to-side struggle every few seconds. In other words, this was a body being reorganized around the demands of walking. Not perfected, not even close, but committed enough that bone had begun to remember it. And you live inside that same kind of memory. Every time you stand on one leg for half a second while the other swings forward, your whole frame is solving an old problem Lucy's kind had already begun to solve. Quietly, awkwardly, with no audience. But this is the part of the story that makes it stranger, not simpler. Because once a body starts changing for this new gait, it does not gain advantages alone. It also inherits a price. That price is one of the reasons this story feels so honest. If two-legged walking had solved everything cleanly, it would be easy to tell as a tale of improvement. But the body does not tell that kind of story. It tells a story of trade-offs. A spine held more upright can become a place of strain. The lower back, especially, carries weight in a way that invites pain. You know that without needing a textbook. Stand too long, lift badly once, wake up stiff from a strange mattress. The complaint rises from deep in the frame. The pelvis changed too, and that change was not kind in every direction. A form shaped for this gait also meant harder childbirth. That matters more than almost anything, because now the origin of upright walking is no longer just about locomotion. It reaches into birth itself, into how difficult it became to bring the next generation of walkers into the world. And then there is speed. On 2 legs, this creature gained certain possibilities, but not the raw running power of a true quadruped. In a flat-out chase, 4-limbed bodies built for sprinting still held the advantage. So whatever this new gait offered, it was a compromise that stayed. That is what makes it strange. Why keep a costly design? Why carry a hurting back, a narrower passage for birth, a slower burst of speed, unless the gains were real enough to outweigh all of that? Somewhere in thinning woodland and widening open ground, the answer begins to take shape. Not in one reason, but in pressure from several directions at once. Those pressures begin with the land itself changing underfoot. Imagine woodland breaking apart, not vanishing all at once, but thinning, opening, leaving wider gaps between shade and shade. The air grows harsher in exposed ground. Food is no longer always gathered under one green roof. A creature built partly for climbing now has to cross more often, travel farther, and spend more time in places where the sun is direct and the cover is poor. In that kind of world, the long walk upright starts to make a certain kind of sense. Because several small advantages may have begun to stack together, not because it was graceful from the beginning, or because one reason explains everything. A body that can move across distance with less waste matters. A body that can raise itself and scan above grass matters. A body that can reach into branches, then come back down and keep going matters. You can feel how ordinary that sounds, and that is exactly the point. Evolution often works through repeated usefulness, not drama. A little less effort over distance, a little better view, a little more access to food. Over enough generations, a little becomes destiny. And then there is another possibility, quiet but powerful. If the forelimbs are not carrying the whole burden of movement every moment, they begin to enter the story differently. Not as legs first, but as hands again. Holding, lifting, bringing something back. Maybe even, in the oldest and simplest sense, freeing the hands. That phrase can mislead if we rush it. It did not mean culture appeared overnight. It did not mean tools suddenly rained out of the sky. It meant the body had begun to rearrange its priorities. And once that happens, everything downstream starts to shift. And one of the biggest shifts may have been simple economy. Just energy. In a world where woodland was pulling apart and food could lie farther off than it once did, the body that spent a little less effort getting from one patch to the next may have had an advantage hard to see in a single day, but powerful over many generations. That idea matters because it changes the mood of the whole story. The long walk upright may have endured not because it looked impressive, but because it worked well enough, often enough, across distance. A creature crossing open ground on two legs might manage those trips with a different balance of cost and reward than one dropping fully into four-limbed travel every time. Not faster in a sprint, we already know the price there, but perhaps steadier over the slow arithmetic of survival. You can feel the truth of that in your own life. Most of your walking is not a chase. It is not heroic. It is hallway walking, kitchen walking, carrying something walking, getting there walking. The body is built, above all, for repetition, for one more stretch, one more errand, one more return. And once you see that, the old clues begin to line up in a different light. The hint in that skull, the ash tracks, Lucy's frame, none of them point to perfection. They point to persistence. But energy alone may not be enough to explain why this form stayed. Distance matters, yes, yet a hotter, more open world presses on a body in another way too, from above. From above, the sun changes the argument. A body moving through more open country does not only spend energy, it absorbs heat. Shade becomes patchy, air shimmers above bare ground. The difference between a back broad to the sky and a body held more vertically may not sound dramatic when you say it slowly, but over long stretches, under repeated exposure, small thermal differences can matter. This is one of the proposed drivers, and it deserves to stay in that careful category. Just another pressure that may have favored this form. A creature carried higher could present less of itself directly to the noon light, while more of the body rose into moving air. In a hotter, more broken landscape, that might help enough to be remembered by survival. Again, the power of this idea is how unglamorous it is, just enduring the day a little better. Maybe that is the deepest pattern in the origin of upright walking. Not one miracle, but several modest advantages layered together: distance, visibility, reaching, heat. None of them overwhelming by themselves, all of them together persuasive enough that bone and behavior slowly bent in the same direction. You know this feeling in your own body, even if you never name it. The way direct sun presses on the shoulders, the relief of a faint breeze on the chest and face, the strange fact that posture can change how the day feels. These are small sensations now. Once, they may have mattered far more. But even heat and distance do not exhaust the mystery. There is another possibility, quieter still, one that begins not with travel across land, but with the simple act of wanting something just out of reach. That possibility begins with a very small scene. A creature is near a branch, or a hanging cluster of food, or something held just high enough to require a stretch. The torso rises, the weight shifts. For a moment, the body is no longer arranged only for moving forward, but for reaching upward. That may sound almost too ordinary to matter, and yet ordinary acts, repeated enough, can leave marks in bone. This is why some researchers have treated feeding as part of the puzzle, just one thread in it. If standing up now and then helped gain access to food, then those brief upright moments were useful, and usefulness has a way of accumulating. A posture practiced for reaching can become a posture tolerated for longer. A tolerated posture can become a more frequent one. Over deep time, frequency becomes anatomy. There is another quiet consequence here. The more this form relied on two legs, even imperfectly, the more the upper limbs could begin doing something other than sharing the full burden of locomotion. Not all at once, not as some sudden miracle, but gradually, freeing the hands for carrying, holding, gathering. That matters because movement is never just movement. It changes what can travel with the body. You know this in the simplest way. Walk across a room with both arms full, and your whole balance system adjusts without asking permission. The old bargain is still there in you. But here the mystery sharpens. Reaching, heat, distance, patchier forests, all of these make sense. And still, none of them alone feels large enough. So the real story may be hidden in the fact that evolution rarely chooses one reason when several can lean in the same direction at once. And that is probably the most truthful way to picture it. Not one cause, but a braid. A cooler climate shrinking forests, longer trips between useful patches, the need to reach, the value of carrying, the pressure of heat in open ground. None of these has to defeat the others. They can all be true in part. They can all lean on the same body from different directions until standing a little more often becomes standing a little longer. And standing a little longer becomes a form that bone begins to support. This matters because people often want a single clean answer, one switch, one grand moment. But the origin of upright walking does not look like that. It looks messier, more patient, more believable. A skull hinting at posture, tracks in ash showing motion, Lucy showing structure. And around those clues, a whole environment pressing, not once, but again and again. You live inside that kind of accumulation too. Most of what shaped your body was not dramatic on any single afternoon. It was repetition, weight on joints, distance underfoot, balance corrected 1,000 times before breakfast. The body learns slowly, and evolution is slower still. So by now we can see the outline of the answer. This gait stayed because it was useful enough in enough ways. But that answer creates a deeper problem. Once a lineage leans into two legs, it cannot change one thing alone. The whole frame has to start negotiating with that decision, from the base of the skull to the hips, from the spine to the leg, from balance to birth. And that is where the story stops being only about reasons and becomes a story about redesign. That redesign begins with a hard truth. Two-legged walking is not one trait. It is a whole arrangement. Change the way the head balances, and the spine has to answer. Change the spine, and the pelvis has to answer. Change the pelvis, and the leg has to fall into line. This is why the old clues matter so much together. The hint in Sahelanthropus tchadensis, the motion in the Laetoli footprints, the structure in Lucy. None of them tells the whole story alone. But together, they show a body being asked to solve the same problem from several directions at once. Think of what that means in simple physical terms. To walk this way, the weight of the upper body has to come down through a narrow support. Every step becomes a brief act of balance on one side, then the other. The trunk cannot just hang forward. The leg cannot swing anywhere it likes. The whole form has to learn restraint, alignment, rhythm. You know that rhythm, even if you never notice it. Stand on one foot for a second while pulling on a sock, and suddenly you feel how much hidden work your body is doing. Tiny corrections in the hip, a flicker in the ankle, the spine adjusting almost invisibly. None of that is accidental. It is the old design, still busy. And this is what makes the story more impressive the longer you stay with it. Upright walking was not a single lucky tweak. It was a chain of coordinated compromises, each one depending on the others enough to hold together. But once a body commits to that chain, one question becomes unavoidable. How long did it take before this awkward solution stopped being an experiment and became the normal way to move through the world? The answer is a very long time. That may sound unsatisfying, but deep history is often like that. We want a sharp beginning, a first clean moment when a creature stood, took a step, and never went back. The evidence does not give us that kind of scene. It gives us hints spread across immense stretches of time. An early suggestion in the skull of Sahelanthropus tchadensis, clear movement in the Laetoli footprints, a body plan in Lucy that had already gone a long way toward making this gait workable. So the change did not happen in one leap. It emerged in pieces. More balance here, more commitment there. A posture that may have begun as occasional became more common, then more useful, then more built into the frame. That is harder to picture than a dramatic breakthrough, but it is also more believable. Bodies do not reinvent themselves in a single stroke. They accumulate solutions. Maybe that is why this story feels so close to your own life. You do not become what you are in one day either. Habit builds quietly. Small corrections, repeated enough, become part of you. The body learns by doing, and over deep time, whole lineages do something like the same. What matters is that by the time those ash prints were pressed into soft ground, this was no longer a rare accident. It was a way of moving. By the time Lucy walked, the skeleton was already carrying that decision in its shape. But once that movement becomes normal, it does more than change muscles and bone. It begins to change how bodies meet each other. Once bodies began meeting the world this way, they began meeting each other this way too. That sounds simple, but it is not small. A creature carried higher sees differently. It approaches differently. It can hold something while moving. It can pause with its head above grass, turn, watch, and keep the hands available for something other than the ground. Even before any later human world existed, this changed the rhythm of shared life. Think about what walking together means when the body is built for it. Distance stops being only an obstacle. It becomes a space groups can manage. A food source can be reached and brought back. A young one can be carried. An object can travel with the walker instead of being abandoned where it was found. The old question of movement starts to widen into a question of relationship. That is why freeing the hands matters, even when we speak about it cautiously. It is not just a technical change in posture. It alters what can be held between departure and return. It changes what one body can bring to another. And once that happens, locomotion stops being only about survival in the narrow sense. It begins to shape exchange, care, and the ways bodies remain connected across space. You can feel the echo of that in your own day without thinking much about it. Carrying groceries, lifting a sleeping child, holding a cup while crossing a room. These are not inventions of modern life. They are ordinary acts made possible by an ancient arrangement. And if that arrangement changed how bodies move together, then sooner or later, it changed something even larger than movement. It changed what a landscape could become. A landscape changes when the bodies crossing it change, slowly through routes repeated often enough to become familiar. Once movement on two legs became reliable, even if still costly, open ground was no longer just a dangerous gap between patches of safety. It became something that could be crossed, carried across, and remembered. Distance itself began to soften. That matters more than it first seems. A body that can travel while holding food, while carrying a young one, while keeping its gaze higher, is not just moving differently, it is beginning to reorganize space. One place can matter to another place because something can be brought between them. A useful branch, a patch of shade, a feeding spot, a safer sleeping area. These are no longer isolated points. They start to belong to a lived pattern. And that, in a very old and quiet way, is where later human worlds begin. Not cities, not roads, not anything so recent. Just the first deep bodily condition for them. A creature able to move through the world with its hands available, its balance committed, its path repeated enough that the land starts to have structure. You still live inside that old structure. Every hallway in a house, every path worn across a yard, every shelf placed at hand height, every object moved from one room to another, all of it assumes this arrangement of spine, pelvis, leg, and hand. But the wonder of it is inseparable from the burden. The same frame that made landscapes usable also made the body vulnerable in new ways. And nowhere is that tension more intimate than in pain itself. Pain is one of the least romantic clues in this whole story, and one of the most revealing. When a body is built to hold itself upright, it gains reach, carrying, distance, all the things we've been talking about. But it also asks the spine to do delicate work under constant load. The lower back becomes a kind of hinge under pressure. Not every ache you feel today is ancient, of course. Chairs, long hours, bad habits, they all add their own trouble. But the deeper structure was always a compromise. That is why this part of the story feels almost intimate. The same arrangement that let a creature cross open ground and return with something in its hands also made that creature easier to hurt in certain ways. The cost was written not only into movement, but into strain, into fatigue. into the small failures of alignment that come with balancing a heavy upper body over two narrow supports. And the pelvis carries an even sharper tension. We've already touched the fact itself. Harder childbirth came with this design. But stay with what that means. A body shaped for this gait did not simply make life easier. It made the arrival of new walkers more difficult. That is a staggering price. It means the story of standing up is tied from very early on to vulnerability at the very moment life begins. You can feel, I think, why this matters. The body is not a monument to perfect engineering. It is a negotiated settlement between conflicting needs. And once you see it that way, another thought becomes impossible to ignore. Maybe the flaws are not side notes to the story at all. Maybe they are some of the clearest evidence that the story is true. And that is a profound reversal. We often treat pain as failure, as if the body is falling short of what it was meant to be. But in this case, some of the strain may be evidence of what the body was built to attempt in the first place. A lower back that complains, a pelvis carrying conflicting demands, a frame that must constantly balance rather than rest on 4 points. These are not random defects scattered through the design. They are signatures of compromise. That does not make suffering noble. It just makes it intelligible. The body is telling the truth about its own history. It is saying, in the plainest possible language, that this arrangement solved one set of problems by accepting another. Reach came with strain. Carrying came with load. Upright balance came with fragility. You can hear that truth in tiny daily moments. The hand pressed to the small of the back after lifting something awkwardly. The brief pause before standing up straight. The way a person shifts weight from one foot to the other while waiting. None of this feels grand, and yet it belongs to a form that chose instability and learned to live inside it. That may be the deepest lesson here. Evolution does not hand out clean victories. It bargains, it trades, it keeps what works well enough even when the invoice keeps arriving. And once you start seeing the body that way, the old clues change again. The skull opening, the ash prints, Lucy's pelvis, they are no longer just evidence that upright walking happened. They are evidence that a risky design held. Which raises a larger question, one that reaches beyond bone and pain both. If this unstable form endured for so long, what did it eventually make possible that was worth carrying all the way into us? What it made possible was not one invention, but a whole way of being in the world. Once this unstable body held together, later human life could begin layering itself on top of it, gradually, over spans so long they are hard to feel. Paths could be repeated, loads could be carried, distances could be managed without abandoning the use of the hands. The same form that hurt could also transport, gather, return, and remain connected across space. That is why the story keeps widening. We began with a skull opening, with ash, with a pelvis and a femur. Very small things. But their meaning does not stay small. They are part of the old bodily foundation beneath journeys, trade, caregiving, work, even the arrangement of spaces around a moving, carrying, upright frame. Civilization came much later, yes, but it did not arrive floating above the body. It arrived inside one. You can test that idea in the most ordinary way. Look around any room you know well. Door handles, tables, shelves, stair steps, bags, cups, cradled children, objects passed from one person to another while standing, all of it assumes this posture. It all assumes balance on two legs and hands not needed for the ground. And yet the awe here depends on scale. Because the same pattern that shaped houses and roads and all the rest began in vulnerable bodies crossing uneven ground, taking one unstable step and then another. Which is why, before we come back fully to your own body, we have to return once more to the clues themselves and see how absurdly small they are compared with everything they explain. And when we do return to them, the scale of the evidence becomes almost absurd. A slight shift in one skull opening, a line of impressions across old ash, a pelvis shaped like a bowl, a femur angled inward. That is so little. You could describe the essentials in a few sentences, and yet those few sentences reach all the way into your living body. This is one of the strangest things about deep history. The causes are enormous, the traces are tiny. The forward-set foramen magnum in Sahelanthropus tchadensis does not give us a full walker. It gives us a hint of posture. The Laetoli footprints do not give us a civilization. They give us pressure in soft ground, step after step. Lucy does not give us the whole lineage. She gives us a frame in which the long experiment had already become anatomical. Small clues, vast consequences. And maybe that is why they feel so powerful, because they force humility on us. You look at those remnants and realize how much of your own existence rests on things that almost vanished. A little more forward under the skull, more stability through the hip, more confidence in the stride. The world you know hangs in part from changes that modest. If you are listening carefully, the story has already begun turning back toward you. Not to flatter you or say you are the goal of it all, only to say that your body is one current form of this old arrangement, one temporary version of a solution that kept being revised and kept somehow holding. And that means the next step is unavoidable. We have to stop looking only at fossils now and start looking at the way you stand. And the strange thing is, you are already doing the experiment's final form every day without noticing. Stand still for a moment, really still. Feel how the weight settles through the heels, how the knees barely soften, how the spine stacks itself, how the head floats over all of it. None of that feels dramatic because your body has hidden the drama from you. It has turned millions of years of adjustment into something as ordinary as waiting for water to boil. This is where the old evidence becomes personal. That slight shift under the skull, those tracks across ash, Lucy's angled leg and bowl-shaped pelvis, they are not just museum facts. They are part of the reason you can stand at a sink, lean over a counter, carry a bag, pause in a doorway, and think about something entirely unrelated while your frame quietly keeps you upright. And yet, even now, the arrangement never becomes effortless in the deepest sense. You sway a little. Muscles make tiny corrections. Balance is being negotiated constantly, below consciousness. The body is calm on the surface and busy underneath. That is the inheritance. Not perfect stillness, but managed instability. That may be why this story lands so hard when you let it in. The origin of upright walking is not locked in prehistory. It is happening again in every ordinary posture you take, in every moment your body catches itself without asking you first. Once you see that, one final realization starts coming into focus. Walking is not the opposite of falling. It is a way of surviving it, over and over. And that is where the story becomes almost uncomfortably intimate. Because once you pay attention to standing, you realize it is not a restful state at all. It only feels restful. Under that feeling, the body is making bargains every second. Tiny shifts through the feet, the ankles answering first, then the knees, the hips, the spine, the neck. A body on two legs is never simply there. It is always adjusting. That is the hidden triumph of this form. correction. Not certainty, but recovery. The same ancient arrangement that left prints in ash and reshaped a pelvis also built a creature that could remain upright by managing small failures before they became big ones. You lean a little too far, and the body rescues you. The head tilts, the trunk answers. One side bears more weight, the other prepares to take it back. If you think about it, that is a very strange way to inhabit the world. A quadruped rests on a broad base. This form lives on a narrow one and calls the constant prevention of collapse normal. No wonder the body grows tired. No wonder the lower back complains. No wonder balance can feel so fragile when age, injury, or exhaustion enter the room. And yet, this same instability became one of the most successful bodily strategies our lineage ever carried. That is the paradox. What seems precarious from the inside turned out to be durable across deep time. Which means the real marvel is not that walking avoids falling altogether. It is that falling itself was turned into a pattern, one the body could repeat. Once you see walking that way, the whole body becomes more mysterious. Each step is a controlled loss of balance. The body tips forward just enough that if nothing answered, you would go down. But something always does answer. The leg swings, the foot lands, weight is caught, and the next small fall begins. Over and over, without applause, without thought, the body turns collapse into motion. That is not poetry pretending to be science. It is the deep logic of this form. A creature on 4 limbs can spread its risk across a wide base. This one commits again and again to a narrower gamble. And yet, that gamble proved durable enough to survive changing climates, shifting landscapes, distance, heat, carrying, birth, strain, all of it. Somehow, this unstable way of moving kept paying for itself. You perform that old gamble so casually that it almost disappears. Walking to the sink, crossing a hallway at night, stepping around a chair without turning on the light. The body is predicting, correcting, saving itself in tiny fractions of a second. It does not ask for your permission. It just continues the ancient work. Maybe that is why this story lands with such force near the end. The fossils gave us hints. The ash gave us motion. The skeleton gave us structure. But your own body gives you the final demonstration every single day. So now we are very close to the strangest recognition of all. What you call an ordinary step may be one of the oldest acts of trust your body performs. And trust is the right word for it. Trust built into flesh, not the kind you place in another person. When you rise from a chair, your body assumes the floor will meet you. The leg will take the load, the spine will stack, the next correction will arrive in time. You do not negotiate any of that consciously. You inherit it. That inheritance is what makes this story feel so vast and so close at once. A forward-set foramen magnum hinted that the head had begun to balance differently. The Laetoli footprints showed that a body had already learned to carry itself across soft ash. Lucy's pelvis and inward-angled femur showed that the frame itself had begun to support the gamble. And now, in you, the gamble has become so familiar it hides in the background of daily life. But familiarity should not fool us. This arrangement is still extraordinary. A creature on 2 legs is always one mistimed correction away from trouble. Age reveals that. Injury reveals it. Exhaustion reveals it. The fact that the body usually succeeds does not make the challenge smaller. It makes the success easier to overlook. So the old chronicle narrows to a very quiet revelation. The long experiment did not end in some distant age and leave only fossils behind. It continues whenever a body leans forward and trusts that the next step will be there to catch it. And that means the final turn of the story is not in a museum case or an ancient layer of ash. It is waiting for you, tomorrow morning, in the first few seconds before you are fully awake. And in those first few seconds, before thought is fully there, the old story returns in its purest form. A foot finds the floor. Maybe it is cool wood, maybe carpet, maybe tile. The body rises almost automatically. Weight shifts forward. The spine stacks. The head comes level. You do not recite any of the old evidence to yourself. You do not think of Lucy or of Ash or of that ancient skull. And still, all of it is there, folded into the movement. That is what makes this ending feel almost unsettling. The most ancient changes are often the least visible. You would notice if you forgot your keys. You would notice if the light did not turn on. But you do not notice the body performing one of its oldest and most improbable achievements before breakfast. You simply stand. And yet standing is never just standing.
It is the whole inheritance gathered into one moment. Climate pressure, distance, balance, pain, carrying, compromise, anatomy, trust. A body that once had to negotiate open ground now rises beside a bed and heads toward a kitchen. The setting changed beyond recognition. The arrangement did not. If you let that settle in, something subtle begins to happen. The ordinary act stops feeling trivial, just deeper than it looked a minute ago. A person crossing a room is also a very old design continuing itself. So when the final step of this story arrives, it does not need a grand reveal in a fossil bed or a desert trackway. It needs only one thing from you tomorrow morning: to notice. So tomorrow morning, before the room is fully bright and before the mind has gathered itself, a heel will touch the floor. Then the rest will follow. Weight will pour down through bone. The spine will rise. The head will steady. One foot will leave the ground, and for the smallest fraction of a moment, the whole body will agree to be vulnerable. Then the other foot will catch it. An old bargain, carried out again without ceremony. That is the true ending of this story. Beyond the fossil in the earth, the ash print held under museum light, even Lucy's patient skeleton, and the hint in that ancient skull, the ending is this living continuation. A body that still solves, in silence, the same problem its ancestors solved with such cost. Distance, heat, balance, strain, carrying, birth, pain. All of it is still folded into that one plain act of crossing a room. Maybe that is why the deepest human things so often arrive disguised as routine. A step does not look like an inheritance. A hallway does not look like deep time. But there it is anyway. Millions of years gathered into the brief pressure of a foot against the ground, then released. For a second, the body leans into emptiness and is answered. After that, the room is only a room again. The light comes in through the window. A hand reaches for a glass, or a door, or the edge of a table. Somewhere beneath all that quiet familiarity, two footprints remain in old ash, and the floor beneath you waits, as it always has, for the next careful landing.